When you touch over here, where you touch your middle finger, the tip of your middle finger, there's a nerve that takes that message up, and it's received in one specific neuron in the brain. You touch a different finger, it's carried by a different nerve to a different neuron in the brain. So the brain knows if this neuron's getting a message, it's coming from this place. If this neuron's getting a message, it's coming from that place. And that's how we know. You can close your eyes and tell where someone's touching you. And it's not just which finger, it's where on the finger. Because every single part of the body has its own specific part of the brain that's dedicated and represents it. Every part of the brain has every part of the body, every muscle, everything in the body, just about, almost without exception, everything that happens has its own specific part of the brain that's responsible for controlling it very specifically. And it's the same with incoming information. It's the same with speech. Everything that happens in the body has its own specific part of the brain that's very specifically dedicated to controlling it, or to processing incoming information. So every part of the body has its own specific representation in super concentrated form inside the brain. And think about it, if just the thing that controls voluntary movement, the primary motor cortex is, let's say, about that big, and it's not that thick, let's say roughly a half a cubic inch in size. And every single part of the body that can move voluntarily, that we can choose to move, has its own specific representation just within the two primary motor cortices. We have one on each side. The right one controls the left movement, and the left one controls the right movement. That means that in this, let's say, roughly half a cubic inch of brain, every single part of the body is represented. Think about how concentrated and how magnified that is. And this is why, for example, there's an expression, the thing that people talk about is like, oh, brain surgeon. It's people would say it's not rocket science, or it's not brain surgery. Right? Because both of those things, every little detail has massive ramifications. If you're stitching up a cut in someone's hand, a 1/4 millimeter to the right or a 1/4 millimeter to the left, when you're putting the needle in to do the stitches, it's not going to make a massive difference. It's not the end of the world. Chances are, with a difference like that, you probably won't even be able to tell the difference in a scar when it heals up. A 1/4 millimeter of difference in a procedure in the brain means a completely different neuron, a completely different nerve cell, which is going to could affect a completely different part of the body, because it's so concentrated. Because there's so much that's coming in from the body and going out to the body, all coming from within this little brain in our heads, that every single part of the body is represented in super concentrated form in the brain, which is why every little thing in the brain has a massive impact. God forbid, a damage to a tiny little bit of the brain could have a massive impact to the body, because everything in the body is represented in super concentrated form in the brain and controlled in super concentrated form in the brain. So we have three things here that we've talked about the brain, which is in the head. It's a source of life for the entire body. It controls everything that happens in the entire body. And every part of the body is represented in super concentrated form inside the brain. And each of these things is true of Rosh Hashanah relative to the year. Every part of the body gets its life from the brain. Every moment in time throughout the entire year gets its life from Rosh Hashanah, because that's when Hashem creates an entire year's worth of time. If all the time of the coming year, 12 or 13 months worth of time, is all created in Rosh Hashanah, that means it still has to be extracted and unpacked throughout the course of the year, but it's all created on Rosh Hashanah. The life of the entire operating system, a year's worth of time, all comes into being and is brought to life, brought into being on Rosh Hashanah. The life, so to speak, of the entire year's worth of time all comes from Rosh Hashanah. And we know we talk about Rosh Hashanah as a day of judgment. It says that on Rosh Hashanah Hashem sits with, the book of life, and Hashem decides everything that's happening throughout the coming year. And, another way of looking at that is that because Hashem's creating all the time of the coming year on Rosh Hashanah, so the nature of all of that time is determined in the moment in which Hashem creates it. All of the time of the coming year is created already on Rosh Hashanah. So on Rosh Hashanah, the nature of all of that time is determined. So the things that are naturally, destined to occur throughout the year are all actually predestined on Rosh Hashanah when that time is created. So everything that's going to happen throughout the year, the nature of all of a year's worth of time, is all controlled by Rosh Hashanah. The same way that the head controls everything that happens throughout the body, Rosh Hashanah controls the nature and occurrences of throughout an entire year's worth of time. So Rosh Hashanah is the source of life for the entire year, just like the brain is a source of life for the entire body. Rosh Hashanah controls everything that's going to happen throughout the year, the same way that the brain controls everything that happens throughout the body.